Before we get started, it's worth mentioning, grooming gangs are real. In towns like Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford and Oxford, groups of men groomed and abused children, mostly young girls, over many years. Men were tried in court, men went to prison. Official investigations confirmed it in heartbreaking detail. Police forces and councils failed those children badly. All of that is documented fact. This video does not question one word of it. And this video does not question survivors either, not one of them. People who came forward to this inquiry did a brave thing, full stop. What this video questions is a document, it's an inquiry, what the people who wrote this report did with the material they were given. Because here's my entire argument up front. If you genuinely care about these victims, then the evidence about what happened to them needs to be strong. Weak numbers and misquoted sources don't help victims. They actually hand ammunition to people who want to dismiss the whole scandal, or even worse, use it for their own political gain. Getting this right really does matter. Now, you probably heard the phrase grooming gangs, rape gangs, but if nobody's ever actually explained to you what happened, here it is plainly. Starting in the 1990s and 2000s, and in some places earlier, in a number of English towns and cities, groups of adult men targeted young girls, mostly girls between about 11 and 16. And they didn't just grab them off the street, they did something slower and honestly much more sinister. It's called grooming. So grooming works like this. An older man or an older woman befriend a child. They're charming. They give them attention, compliments, gifts, even alcohol and sometimes drugs. To a lonely or vulnerable child, they feel like this is their boyfriend or girlfriend, like the first person who's ever really cared. And these individuals were deliberate about who they picked. Girls in council care homes or from chaotic and struggling families. Girls who'd already been let down by every adult in their lives. Girls nobody was watching out for. And then once she trusts this individual, once she may even think they might even love her, the trap closes in. They start passing her to their friends, their relatives, their associates. She's driven to houses and flats in other towns and abused by groups of men. If she resists, threats are made against her family. And this wasn't one bad man. It was networks of men sharing victims between them. That's the gang part. Now, here's the part that turned a horrific crime into a national scandal about the state itself. The girls told people, they told the police. Parents begged social services for help, and over for years, the authorities failed them. Girls as young as 12 or 13 were written off as troublemakers. Some were even described by professionals as making a lifestyle choice. Some of these victims, they were arrested themselves whilst the men went untouched. Files sat unread and warnings were ignored. It started to crack open properly around 2011 when a journalist at the Times began investigating. In 2012, 9 men were convicted in Rochdale, near Manchester. And then in 2014 came the moment the entire country found out. An independent investigator, Professor Alexis J., published a report into one town, Rotherham, in South Yorkshire. Her conservative estimate, at least 1,400 children had been sexually exploited in that one town over 16 years, while the local council and police repeatedly failed to act. 1,400 in one town. Heads rolled and the council was declared unfit for purpose. After that, it kept coming. Convictions in Oxford, in Huddersfield, Newcastle, Telford and elsewhere. In 2022, an inquiry into Telford found more than 1,000 children had been abused there over decades. A 7-year national inquiry into child sexual abuse, you'll hear me call it the IICSA, reported in 2022. In 2025, the government commissioned a senior official, Baroness Casey, to audit everything we know about these group-based crimes. And after her report, the government announced a full national statutory inquiry, one with legal powers. That inquiry is running right now. So that's the scandal. Real crimes, real convictions, appalling institutional failure. None of that is in dispute, not by me, not by anybody serious. But there's one more layer you need, because it's the reason that this subject is politically radioactive. In several of the most notorious cases in Rochdale, in Rotherham, Oxford, Telford, many of the convicted men were of Pakistani heritage, from Muslim family backgrounds, and most of the identified victims were white British girls. That pattern raised two genuinely hard questions the country has been fighting about ever since. Number one, is there something about those individuals who committed these particular crimes that we need to honestly confront, that we need to question? And number two, did the authorities fail these girls partly because they were scared that investigating men from an ethnic minority would get them called racist? And so that brings us neatly to June 2026. Enter this report. Where did it come from? It was set up and chaired by a politician, Rupert Law, a member of parliament. He used to be in Reform UK, which is a right-wing political party. He left after a falling out, and now he runs his own political movement. More on him later. He announced his own inquiry into the grooming gangs and asked the public to fund it. Around 23,000 people donated, about £800,000. The panel that heard evidence included other sitting politicians. Survivors came and gave their testimony, and this report is the result. It ends with recommendations, new laws, deportations, and in the foreword, a call for penalties, and I'm quoting, up to and including death. Now, before I say anything critical, let me be fair to it. There is nothing wrong, in principle, with an independent, privately funded investigation. Journalists and ordinary citizens have broken real scandals plenty of times. The Rotherham story itself was cracked open by a journalist. You don't need the government's permission to find the truth, but you do need to understand what this report is not, because the word inquiry is carrying a lot of weight here. In Britain, an official inquiry or a statutory inquiry, like the one the government has now launched, has legal powers. That word statutory is a fancy word which just means it's set up under an act of parliament. It can legally force witnesses to turn up and to answer questions. It can even force the police, councils, even hospitals to hand over their files. Evidence gets tested, evidence gets questioned, challenged, checked against documents. And if the inquiry is going to publicly criticize a person or an organization, the law makes it warn them first and hear their side. That's not red tape. That's how you make sure what ends up in the report is actually true. This report had none of those powers, and credit where it's due, it admits that. On page 7, it, quote, lacked statutory powers. It couldn't compel anyone or anything, which means it could only hear from people who chose to come forward and see the documents people chose to share. Again, that doesn't make it wrong, but it means everything, I mean everything, comes down to one question. How careful were they with what they had? Did they check everything? That's a question we can test. So let's test it.